Funny things tend not to happen to me. I am not a natural comic. I need to think about things a lot before I can be even remotely amusing. I think I have an inner confidence that my tastes are pretty simple, that what I find funny finds a wide audience. I'm not particularly intellectual or clever or minority-focused in my creative instincts. And I'm certainly not aware of suppressing more sophisticated ambitions. Apart from the fact that your physical ability starts to decline, I also think someone in their 50s being childlike becomes a little sad. You've got to be careful. I have always regarded Mr. Bean as a timeless, ageless character, and I would rather he be remembered as a character mostly in his 30s and 40s. It's not easy to take a sitcom and turn it into a feature. I have always worried about things more than I should. In the modern media age we are rarely surprised by what we see. Whether it's on television or film or in the theater, everything is so advertised, so trailed, that most entertainment is merely what you thought it was going to be like. No, I was only funny on stage, really. I think I was funny as a person toward my classmates when I was very young. You know, when I was a child, up to about the age of 12. I like to juggle with one ball at a time. Then I put the ball down and do nothing for extended periods of time. I feel as though the camera is almost a kind of voyeur in Mr. Bean's life, and you just watch this bizarre man going about his life in the way that he wants to. There is always that age-old thing about England and America being divided by a common language. You think that because we speak English and you speak English that you're bound to understand and like everything that we do. And of course you don't. And what's interesting about him as a comic character is that the custard pie hardly ever ends up on his face. To criticize a person for their race is manifestly irrational and ridiculous, but to criticize their religion, that is a right. That is a freedom. People think because I can make them laugh on the stage, I'll be able to make them laugh in person. That isn't the case at all. I am essentially a rather quiet, dull person who just happens to be a performer. Mr. Bean is essentially a child trapped in the body of a man. All cultures identify with children in a similar way, so he has this bizarre global outreach. I would return to the Blackadder character if the opportunity came up. I have no qualms about that at all. But, actually, so many of the clerics that I've met, particularly the Church of England clerics, are people of such extraordinary smugness and arrogance and conceitedness who are extraordinarily presumptuous about the significance of their position in society. When I was doing Bean more than I've done him in the last few years, I did strange things, like appearing on chat shows in character as Mr. Bean. It's a bit disconcerting being treated like Madonna, not so much in Canada, but certainly in the US, as I'm sure you know. Money is all, and if they can get another 26 programs of the same thing even though it advances the culture or those actors' careers not at all it doesn't matter. Confronting a stadium audience, you can't see the whites of their eyes. It's just an amorphous mass of noise and, of course, you can't see the alleged billions watching at home either, so the degree to which you are intimidated is quite low. Nope, I don't enjoy work generally. Not because I'm lazy. It's just also stressful and worrying. The older you get, the more you realize how happenstance has helped to determine your path through life. The clear problem of the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism, ridicule, sarcasm, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy, can be interpreted as insult. But generally speaking, I tend to be quiet and introspective. I enjoy racing historic motor cars from the 50s and 60s. The seed of my interest was planted when I was about 12 years old and took over my mother's Morris Minor. I drove it around my father's farm. But my favorite car is still a McLaren F1, which I have had for 10 years. Mr. Bean is at his best when he is not using words, but I am equally at home in both verbal and nonverbal expression. Marketing is what gets you noticed. And that side of it something, this side of it, if you like, doing interviews, is the side of it that I least enjoy, and yet is 50% of the project. It's the difficulty we had with Mr. Bean, actually, when it went from TV to film. You certainly discover that you need to explain more about a character. Of course, some would say if you have a performing inclination, then you should become a lawyer. That's a platform we use, or a priest. You know, anywhere you lecture and pontificate to people. I'm more critical of the films I make than anyone else. And, we put a lot more value, or at least I personally put a lot more value, on the creative values and creative challenges of something than the commercial necessities. We still have a tradition certainly in English television. It's faded a bit in the last 5 years, but we still have a tradition where the important thing is the quality and the challenging nature of the programming. I don't much enjoy back and forth. I mean, I think it has its own particular qualities, but I think it's inferior to any of the half-hour ones we did. I'm very good at having time off. I tend to take whole years off. I had 1994 and 1997 off. I find it very easy. I just love pottering around doing normal things. You're about as useful as a one-legged man at an arse-kicking contest. Get that right, then if you get the quality right, then the marketability or whatever, your ability to sell videos or your ability to earn money or whatever, will follow naturally. But try to be creatively lead rather than market lead. And that's important to me. I consider myself more of a visual comedian than a physical one. I suddenly think the job of acting is a difficult one. It's not as flip, irrelevant and shallow a calling as I thought it was in the 80s. I think the character does tends to suit an episodic thing, because what's fun about him is that he doesn't care about anyone else, and it's very difficult for a main character, a lead character, in a movie to not care about anybody else. In TV, and in particular in commercials, you don't really need to explain very much at all. You just say he's a spy and he's a little bit theatrical and overblown and smug and he's not very good at his job. I want to express myself in a different way. I have a performing inclination. I enjoy racing historic motor cars from the 50s and 60s. The seed of my interest was planted when I was about 12 years old and took over my mother's Morris Minor. I drove it around my father's farm. But my favorite car is still a McLaren F1. Which I have had for 10 years. Although the great frustration about this role is the fact that there's one thing Megrain never does, and that's drive. He's always driven, or he takes the train, or he gets the bus. I was saying, well, why don't we bring the changes for the 21st century, and stick him in the car? Executive producer and son of the author, John Simonon, said, well, you can if you want, but there'll be lots of people who won't like it. So he's a non-driver, but no, Top Gear was never a consideration for me, and neither was I asked. A law which attempts to say you can criticize and ridicule ideas as long as they are not religious ideas is a very peculiar law indeed. Apart from the fact that your physical ability starts to decline, I also think someone in their 50s being childlike becomes a little sad. You've got to be careful. Having spent a substantial part of my career parodying religious figures from my own Christian background, I am aghast at the notion that it could, in effect, be made illegal to imply ridicule of a religion or to lampoon religious figures. At the moment, I'm certainly not thinking never again, but neither am I thinking I can't wait to play that part again. I'm somewhere in between. Get that right, then if you get the quality right, then the marketability or whatever, your ability to sell videos or your ability to earn money or whatever, will follow naturally. But try to be creatively lead rather than market lead. And that's important to me. I have a problem with Porsches. They're wonderful cars, but I know I could never live with one. Somehow, the typical Porsche people, and I wish them no ill, are not, I feel, my kind of people. I don't go around saying that Porsches are a pile of dung. But I do know that psychologically I couldn't handle owning one. And, we put a lot more value, or at least I personally put a lot more value, on the creative values and creative challenges of something than the commercial necessities. For telling a good and incisive religious joke, you should be praised. For telling a bad one, you should be ridiculed and reviled. The idea that you could be prosecuted for the telling of either is quite fantastic. Funny things tend not to happen to me. I am not a natural comic. I need to think about things a lot before I can be even remotely amusing. Art is something that nobody laughs at and nobody makes any money out of is the attitude, which I would dispute. I have always believed that there should be no subject about which one cannot make jokes, religion included. Clearly, one is always constricted by contemporary mores and trends because, after all, what one seeks above all is an appreciative audience. I have always regarded Mr. Bean as a timeless, ageless character, and I would rather he be remembered as a character mostly in his 30s and 40s, but, actually, so many of the clerics that I've met, particularly the Church of England clerics, are people of such extraordinary smugness and arrogance and conceitedness who are extraordinarily presumptuous about the significance of their position in society. Certainly in the second film, Megre's Dead Man, which is quite a more unpleasant and darker story, it's quite different in tone and feel. Confronting a stadium audience, you can't see the whites of their eyes. It's just an amorphous mass of noise and, of course, you can't see the alleged billions watching at home either, so the degree to which you are intimidated is quite low. I find his films about as funny as getting an arrow through the neck and discovering there's a gas bill tied to it. As I was leaving this morning, I said to myself, the last thing you must do is forget your speech. And, sure enough, as I left the house this morning, the last thing I did was to forget my speech. I don't think you should be too absolutist about what you play and what you don't play.
So guys, वीडियो को थोड़ा सा भी अच्छा लगे तो एक लाइक कर देना और जाके चैनल पे कर देना सब्सक्राइब और कैसे लगा मेरा वीडियो कमेंट करके बताना। तो बाय बाय, मिलते हैं अगले वीडियो।